Hello, my name is Adam Bean and welcome to the 52nd edition of airhacks TV with the following topics, or the very first topic is the latest episode of airhacks FM podcast. And I had a conversation with Emily from IBM and we had a chat about MicroProfile, and I ignored MicroProfile for a long time, and the reason is MicroProfile was about, at the beginning, it was like they tried to package or try to create a smaller application server runtimes. And for me, the application servers were always small, so there was actually nothing to optimize. But what happens recently, last year, 2017, they had 4 releases with additional functionality, which is already exciting. So they had metrics on configuration and so forth. But the biggest use case, what happened in last year, was stock application servers are shipping actually MicroProfile features. So I'm already using MicroProfile on Payara 4 and 5 and on Open Liberty. And this is actually a huge deal because you don't have to introduce a new server runtime in order to use the features of MicroProfile. And actually, what we do, we actually combine Java 8 with MicroProfile. You have to be a little bit careful with JSON-S because Java 8 is newer than the MicroProfile 1.3, but MicroProfile 2.0 will fix that. So if you are curious, listen to the episode about MicroProfile with Emily. So, and on that note, I also introduced, this is going to be the last slot in December, a whole day workshop with microprofiles with or without Jakarta EE. Why with or without? Because what I will do, I will cover just MicroProfile and then show you what happens if you combine MicroProfile with Java 7 or Java 8, and I plan to use different runtimes, and I will cover actually as much as possible. With, of course, from how to call it, not best practice, rather than practices from my projects. Okay, so now we cover that. And also I get more and more questions regarding projects and requests and job requests. Probably what I could do is to create a page like airhacks jobs or whatever, because I cannot remember actually who asked what, and I get more and more questions about that, whether I know Java E developers, and of course I know them, and then a few weeks later a Java E developer asked me whether I know projects, so there will be just thinking about that. Okay, so if you're interested, post me a tweet or do something like this. So very first question, Geton ask me. So what he did is the following. So they have several projects in jars. Each jar, this is my understanding, has an own module. And then there is like a super jar, not super jar, the application war, probably even, and it references all the jars. And now the question is what Geton would like to do is to selectively load classes from different jars. By the way, I think I even implemented that. Wait a second, CDI plugins, Adam Bean. This is my green book. No, this is now building plugins with Java 6. This could be this. Yeah, exactly. This is what I implemented 7 years ago. And what it did is this actually runs on my server. And what it does is I have different configuration providers. And with that, it iterates over all the configuration providers and is able to override the default configuration with the providers. And this is very similar requests, with the difference that Geton would like to selectively load plugins from different jars. So first, what I would do is I would ask myself why I have all the jars. You shouldn't never implement jar for fun. The jars should have like some business or domain responsibility. And if you identify a business or domain responsibility, what you should do is you should find a name and create a qualifier. And then what you could do, then you can selectively load classes with different qualifiers because the qualifiers will represent a jar. This would be a good design in my eyes. It will also maintainable, because every jar you create, you can justify by domain or business responsibility. You could implement a qualifier, and all the qualifiers will be known by the main var and can be loaded on demand. This is what I would do. And the alternative is not as easy. What you could do, the second idea would be to introduce a how it's called, stereotype, which is marked by alternative, but I would start with the qualifier. Kamikaze with triple Z, so this is like extreme kamikaze, asked me about bin discovery modes in CDI, and I didn't had the question long time already. So at the beginning of Java 6, I get lots of questions why I'm not using the annotated mode and always the all mode. This is actually what I always do in my projects and workshops, and also my screencasts. I always use the all mode. And this it's strongly recommended you use annotated. And the question is why? And at the beginning, it was always justified by performance. So if you use all, the CDI runtime will have to scan the whole jar. And the more classes you have, the longer it will take. But in my projects, my Java EE projects are not that big. So even a microservice can have at most a few hundred classes. And with the view 100 classes, it was never a performance issue. So it was always, it started quick. And so in my eyes, of course, annotated would be even faster. But the question is, can you even measure the difference, and does it really matter? So so is it best practice to use annotated? I don't think so, in my eyes, because you will have to annotate everything just in order to be injected. And the question is why. It's not very convenient. I wouldn't, if you have a problem, switch to annotated. I never had the problem. I never switched to annotated. Okay. A very good question from Monsieur Daniel Vamara, exactly. And Daniel is the AirHacks alumni. So he attended, I think, several times even AirHacks workshops. And he has 14 different microservices, and there's one is travel. And by the way, he is building a platform for my own startup, which is pretty cool. So, Daniel, I could interview you on my blog, if you like, about your startup endeavor with microservices, because I get more and more requests from startups about, Java EE and microservices. So you are not alone. So if you like, I could interview you. And he asked me, okay, he would like to call from one service multiple microservices, and if he uses completable feature all the, I think 4 microservices are called, and if one fails, the whole thing fails. And what he would like to say is to have the majority. So he would like to call 3 services out of 4, and if 3 are called, then it is successful. So first, what is successful and what not is up to you. For instance, what you could do is you could do the following: all of, and you could use a web target. This is the call of microservice with a timeout, and you can catch the exception on timeout, and therefore everything is going to be successful. And you can introduce an optional return value, and what it will mean is you will always get all the results, but some could be empty, and then the empty results were not successful. So and then you can afterwards iterate and then decide, with I think stream limit, for instance, limit 3 or limit 4, or just filter, and you say, okay, I'm filtering out and count if there's less than 3 or 4, then it's not successful. So there's all of, there's also any of. What you could also do, you could, for instance, invoke all the external service individually with Rx, with the reactive extension. And what you get back is completable future, and then combine them. So you can combine the results as well at the end. Then you have full control. If this is not clear enough, I could try to write a blog post or something about that. But I think it's clear. So what we are saying here, if some fail, and failure means they are throwing an exception. So if you catch the exception and return optional, so then it's not a failure. So there is no result. Yeah, I think, yeah. Okay, I hope it is clear. So, Monsieur J. Pollard from GitHub joined GitHub this month. Very good. And thank you for my stuff. Yeah, I thank you, Monsieur Pollard, for watching and buying my stuff. And he recently converted from Microsoft to Java, which is remarkable because Microsoft right now is great. I mean, they have lots of open source tools. They have even hired Java evangelists from Oracle. They have Java in Azure Cloud. And they bought GitHub, which is a little bit controversial, but at least they have interest in developers again. So what I would say, if you would, convert from Microsoft to Java 10 years ago or 5 years ago, would be understandable. But right now, as I'm glad that you converted, but now Microsoft, I really like Microsoft right now. So, on a perspective on Java is refreshing and enlightening. And I hear this a bit, and I have sometimes the impression that people think I'm somehow an evangelist of Java or whatever, but it's not like this. So actually, people ask me, to solve a problem, and if I show them with how it can be solved with stock Java or stock Java E, they are really pleased. Or even now with JavaScript, for a few years I do also some front-end stuff, so I show them stock web standards, actually exactly the same. They are pleased with the result, and then I show the result in conferences or what we did in conferences. It was like, okay, this is really, really fun. So what my approach is, do the simplest possible solution. And if this does not work, then introduce new stuff. So this is basically what I do. So are you planning to be involved with any specification for Jakarta E? Yes. So I'm already on the mailing list a little bit. Specifications. I will join Jakarta E or MicroProfile, one of both. I would do a little bit. The problem with the mailing list, it was not very productive. So I wrote lots of emails, but it seems like I'm coming from, if you read the mailing list, the mails, I'm coming from projects and the others are coming from a server vendors, and we have complete opposite opinions. For instance, people who are building server, they would like to have profiles in order to have profiles to modularize the Java E platform. And I don't like profiles. I would like to have profiles to solve use cases. So if someone would introduce a profile to Java E, I would like to have a proper name which identify the use case. For instance, like messaging profile, or I have no idea. So something like this, but not the like micro, nano, and big fool or whatever. This doesn't mean anything. So this is one of the examples. And just listen to the podcast about MicroProfile. They are more pragmatic, and I also like the crowd. So I would do something. The problem is I have to work in between, and I have answer your questions. So that the only problem I have is time, really. So if you would invent time machine, I would participate everywhere because lots of fun. Very good. At the end of the green book, real-world Java E patterns, I present SOA, domain-driven design, and two valid approaches in Java E and ECB. This is entity control boundary pattern. Why I use the ECB pattern? Because it's one of the oldest pattern from Ivor Jacobson. And if there is a pattern out there, I will just use it before I invite my own pattern. So this is the whole idea behind. It was easy and straightforward, and he said, and I definitely used the SOA approach. Do you find yourself using SOA approach or DDD more often with clients, or do you have any new thoughts on these approaches? So SOA, I meant procedural approach, not with SOAP. In the whole book, I didn't use any SOAP, so it's like service-oriented or microservice-oriented approach and domain-driven approach. So what we use right now is more the procedural approach. Why? Because most of the microservices are remarkable simple. So usually what we have is like dumb entities with JSON serialization back and forth, a boundary, and an optional controls. This is what is most of my microservices. Having said that, what I reviewed some Java 6 and 7 applications, and they use domain-driven approach for crazy complex calculations. And this was also it was a great code. It was not written by me, but I saw it already in the wild. So you can do both. I would say the SOA approach is more common. DDD only matters if you have some heavy lifting, some calculation logic, so more complex stuff going on. And if you have just microservice, which talks to a data store or to other microservices, usually the SOA approach or procedure approach is better. there's another name for that. It was called transaction script back then, like a pattern. If you search for transaction script, hopefully it is transaction script. Yes, transaction script. And it was like the boundary and dump entities. Okay. So your homework, take a read about transaction script. So, do you have any recommendation on being a successful consultant with Java or in general? And I get similar question later. You have built a great reputation over the years. Oh, thank you, and you continue to do. Great reputation. This is not always the case. Usually, what you don't see, I have to fight a lot. For instance, in last review, I had to delete lots of modules and in my eyes superfluous interfaces, and I got like a formal emails that my architecture will never scale because they cannot assign enough developers to the project and they're monolithic. And what they actually did, they introduced lots of jars, and every implementation had an interface, and so it can backfire, but you don't see this. So on conferences, there's like lucky community, and in projects there's lots of fighting going on. So in one project, so they had I don't know why. So everything also had the interface, multiple layers, mappers back and forth. Like the entity had data transfer object, and I let them delete the data transfer object, and they say, okay, what I'm doing is not clean code. It's like, why not? What I'm doing is no code, right? But So the reputation is relative, and this is what you should know. Regardless what you are doing, you are actually always wrong. So you always get some negative pushback. So this is what will happen. And so advice, what I try to do is to be somehow loyal. Over the years, I do actually the same stuff, the same idea, because I believe in it. So and I think this is why my clients, I get I get emails from forgotten clients from my forgotten names. 10 years ago they asked me again, can you help us with the project, because back then you did something like this and you are still teaching the same stuff. And it's not the same from technology perspective, it's more like philosophy. What you shouldn't do is, I think, in one day, teach about modularity, and the next time say modularity is crap, you should, do monolith. Or in one day you can say C is great, and then say C is crap, or why you're not using, let's say, JavaScript, complete opposite points of view. You could do this if, only if, the whole environment changes or something like this. I hope you know what it means. So, the world is changing, so you cannot stick with JDK 1.0, but you have, something in what you believe and stick with it. So this is what I can tell you. And this helped me a lot because I didn't have to relearn. So as you can watch my videos, read my own books, the source code was completely different, but the idea was always the same. And for me, it was great because I didn't have to relearn over and over again. I just optimized in one direction, and I'm really happy I did it. So I don't know whether it is advice to be successful, because I'm of the view remaining freelancers. Actually, everyone I know from back then, from beginning of Java, they are. I met one. There's almost a CEO of a company, CEOs, CTOs, and whatever. And I'm just a freelancer, but I'm a happy one. So I do not regret the decision. Okay, so sorry for the meta conversation, but I hope it helped you. If not, just rephrase the question. It's really hard to have a monologue about that. So Charlotte, not bad, USA. Thank you, Jason. It's a Jason Pollard. Okay. Kuhlmann P. from Switzerland. Ask me. I have two questions regarding read-only validation calls in JE application with REST API and JPA as persistent framework. A call in a validation service should not make any persistent changes, and how to deal with that. And the idea is with set rollback only. So what you could do, indeed, you could use, for instance, not supported in this case. So you can deactivate the transactions and you can read without transactions. This will work. The problem is, if you read something without transaction, you don't have the isolation levels. But what's possible, there's, I think, read-only annotation in JPA. and not JPA. It is Eclipse link. Has read-only. And why read-only was used is read-only was used for performance reason. And you think about this, why? Because if the container knows it is read-only entity, it doesn't have to create a clone for each transaction. So this was actually, so if you're using Eclipse link, you could use read-only, but it's not a standard. I actually forgot to look up whether there's standard in JPA, read-only, and this could help you. You could deactivate transactions, but then you have to be careful with the default isolation level in the database. Okay, and of course, what you could do, you could have entities which are immutable. This would be the best decision because immutable entities means, yeah, whatever you do, you cannot change them. So this would be the best thing. So, and the next question is, what is the best REST style for this kind of call? And this kind of call means validation. So I want to validate some order data that is normally would persist using put orders 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have an resources path, resource path orders. So there are multiple orders, and this is the ID. What I will do is I would introduce a new resource because it is actually a business thing, and I will call that validations. So validations, and then we have to think about this. What is the next path? So either validation / orders, or validations with the ID if this is unique, or what you could also do, of course, orders validation. But then we will have to have orders / creation. It's also possible. But I would consider validations as the business resource. And then I would either put or post. Probably, in this particular case, there's actually, you could. So if we do the validations / ID, we could put and reuse the ID. So this would be a put with the ID. So this is an idempotent call. And the payload, the post, would be additional data, whatever you like, what you would like to validate. And what you get back is the validation result. This is how I would do this. But my first idea was, as I read your comment, to introduce validations resource. So this one is simple. It's a long question, but it's simple. I hope I got it. So there are person and country, and depending on REST path, he would like to return different slices from both entities. So like, have a flexible entity. I wouldn't use JSON-B for that. I would use json-p. And if you look at the code, Adam Bean, json-p DTO, I think. Yeah. This is what I mean, JSON object to JSON. And what you can do, you can even pass here a filter or additional class, and you can, depending on use case, create a fluent data transfer object. And in the green book, I described it as generic DTO. It was long before JSON-P. So this is what you could do. And with JSON-B, you could implement this as well. And this is like with visibility strategy, I think is the name. But this is, no one will expect such a thing, that you are modifying the visibility depending on use case. Okay. And now the questions about Flyway. What do you think about the following solution? I did actually almost exactly the same. So the question is, Monsieur Philip Ricks asked me, and he attended also, he's also alumni from airhacks. How do migrate your database schema with Flyway? Do you use Java, Maven, or CLI approach? And what Philip did, he created a class, Flyway Migration, which is a singleton transaction attribute not supported because of the post construct. This is what I don't get, why it's not supported. Because I think in Java 7 or 8, the lifecycle methods can be even transactional. And startup singleton, what means the post construct method is invoked, And what Flyway does, then it migrates the database. And I did exactly the same without Flyway DB in projects for SQL migration. So we had to create a database first. So we did exactly the same. So this is what I would do. And also CLI approach Maven. Yeah, also with Maven, for instance, right now we have cloud native OpenShift pipeline, and one slot of the pipeline is Flyway DB migration. And then we don't use it inside the application, we use it outside the application. The question is to know when to use what. In the one case, I use the startup singleton bean approach for a product. So I implemented more or less a product for a client. And on the installation of the product, everything was set up. In a project where we deploy multiple times a day, I think it's better to have a Maven approach, because you will see in the Jenkins pipeline one slot and you will see whether the migration is successful or not. Okay. And now the last question is, and what's your Flyway strategy and enterprise projects for SQL scripts? Do you create a single SQL script for every change during the sprint, or do you collect all changes during one sprint cycle and squash them in one SQL script? So I have one line per change, per commit, and happens over and over again. And at one point of time, we optimize that. So this is the strategy. So each change is a new line in the script, and then it gets optimized. Or even if the database runs in Docker, we have like a snapshot of the database, like a baseline, and we start from the baseline. If you could give your 20 years old, this is self 3 lessons for your developer career, what would it be? 20 years old myself for my developer career, what would it be? So at the beginning of my career, my plan was to learn all programming languages and have lots of vacations. And then I got so many requests regarding. So at first I started with C++, then with Java, and then I was stick with Java because there were too many requests. And I actually, from the career-wise, I think at the beginning I could optimize my time a little better. So now I'm really good with it. So and at the beginning I said yes to everything, and I also learned everything, which was good. But I also learned, exotic things. And this is also, the question is almost forgot. What are the 3 most important books about programming, software design, Java every developer should read in your opinion? So I constantly buy books, and I try to keep up with the books. So if I'm waiting for a flight, or during, the takeoff, or takedown, I wanted to say takedown, I'm not able to work with my laptop, so I'm reading usually on my smartphone books, and I'm really looking forward to reading the books. But I cannot tell you what was the most influential one. Probably the Java in a Nutshell from David Flanagan about JDK 1.0 was the very first one book, and this one, and at the beginning were some interesting books with interesting ideas. What I was inspired were the crazy ideas, I would say. I would advise you not, to ask for a particular book, rather than looking forward to reading books. And read as much you can, and then form your own opinion. This is what I could advise you. And so just read the books, and don't believe too much, in this is probably what I don't know whether I knew this back then or not. Probably not. What I didn't knew probably as a 20 years old is that everything will repeat over and over again. So whatever I learn, with 20, I will have to relearn with 40 with complete different names. So this advice, what I can do. All the shiny things you are learning, they are not really new. They are just repackaged to being new. And one purpose is probably also a little bit to confuse the clients in order to sell some consulting stuff, I guess. Not I guess, I know. In one project, a consultant told me they have, they always package histories with Java EE because the dashboards are great and the whole project looks more professional and they can charge more. So, okay, this is also interesting. Okay, you could also sell fog machines to make clouds better, but but a different thing. I hope it's clear. So what you should do is first you live only once, so enjoy the time. And you are spending significant amount of time in your work, so you should also enjoy that. And in one point of time, I didn't separate it between work and leisure or hobby, and I'm also grateful for that because I enjoy all the time, regardless whether it's leisure or working schedule. Okay, so Philip, thank you for attending the airhacks, and thank you for asking. And this is great code. I did something similar, and what I don't like to throw runtime exceptions rather than illegal state exceptions, something like this. And yeah, this is what the only difference. Okay, cool. I hope we are set. Is a question here? Oh, Tony Gallas asked me, and what's here? Oh, Monsieur, this is Monsieur Tucker from California now says good morning because it's 9 a.m. In his case, he's also an airhacks attendee and one of the Christmas airhacks attendee. By the way, the picture you see in Twitter is also interesting. So a company asked me, to deliver a session, and they asked me for agenda. I was like, I'm really interested what happens, and I sent them a kick-ass enterprise development with standards, and they accepted the name, which is actually really interesting, or interesting for a rather traditional company, I would say. Okay, Tony Gallas asked me, we have two systems, mixed Java 5 and 6 in ER deployed in JBoss 4 and a war deployed in Tomcat 7. The systems interact each other using RMI. I would like to migrate both to Pyara 5 at the first step. Can you give me some advice? Yes. If you do such a things, don't change anything. Try to just run it first on Pyara, whatever. So minimal changes, just try to start the systems at Pyara without any changes. And introduce continuous integration. And what I mean by continuous integration, it doesn't have to be Jenkins. It only has to be fully automatic. So on each commit and change, the system has to be redeployed and retested, whatever you're doing. And even if this is just a smoke test, just do it. So it has to be automated. And of course, it has to be checked into version control, but this is I think, true. So just make it work with Pyara. And it seems like it will work because the Tomcat, it should run out of the box. And the JBoss 4, it depends how many proprietary deployment descriptors do you have. And there is one, probably, there's already Java 5. So I think it should just work. If you, yeah, this is what I would do. Minimal changes, just deploy it and see what happens and try to make it work without any migration first. Okay, thank you for watching and see you in August and 53rd edition of Airhacks TV. Airhacks.com. The next one where are they? I think November is the web stuff. Should be lots of fun. So I'm hacking more and more stuff, even with some MVC stuff and stuff like this. And in December is Christmas edition almost, or vacations edition. And with a new slot, MicroProfile. And last year, it was overcrowded, this slot. So if you would like to attend, register early. And, of course, airhacks.fm. So watch this and airhacks.io. Thank you for watching, and bye.